Hello and welcome to Liberty Explored, where I review ideas related to free speech, integrity, and integral human values. And today we're going to talk a little bit about media responsibility and the history of integrity with media and network TV. So what I want to show in this video is just how fundamentally obvious it is that Piers Morgan will completely deny any self-responsibility. Piers Morgan will use whataboutism. The word that to keep in mind when we're going through this is discernment. And if you look up discernment, especially if you go into the older meanings, the older definitions, you will find that the very last definition or the earlier definitions talk about telling the difference between good and evil.
I guess from my perspective, it's been fairly clear to me that we've been aggressively normalizing revolutionary thinking, and we don't recognize it when we see it. So as a result, you have decided that you've created people who I don't really think exist. You might call them the woke or progressives, but coming from a relatively progressive left of center family myself, we used to recognize these people as revolutionaries, and you'll see them by their empathy. Their empathy is entirely shifted. So if you've seen any of the interviews of random college students asked about Charlie Kirk's murder, and they're smirking or they're happy or they're making jokes.
Yeah, it's been really
what
shocking.
You're seeing is, well, that's the odd part. It's not really shocking at all. You just don't realize what you've been looking at. Revolutionaries have a shifted empathy complex. They're at war. They're at war with the system in which they embed. And the nurses administering your IV, the person making your coffee, the person at the DMV processing your driver's license is someone who is often completely unsympathetic with the society in which you exist and who would ask for its overthrow, potentially with violence, and often violence is to be celebrated. So, you know, there's language around this called direct action. And I just have this feeling that effectively Americans haven't been, I don't know, in contact with revolutionary thinking enough to understand that it's an entirely shifted empathy complex.
But is it almost worse than that? If they were genuine revolutionaries, then perhaps I would subscribe to that theory. I also think a lot of them have been contaminated by the constant refrain that Trump's Adolf Hitler, that his supporters are Nazis, they're all a bunch of fascists, that if you are a bit of an unhinged young brain and you keep hearing that repeatedly and you see it all over your TikTok and everything else, that eventually you sort of see it almost as a civic duty to defend your nation against these Nazis. I think that's part of the problem.
So Piers Morgan finally hits something correct. He's correct in recognizing that connection, the connection between the coded language of calling people Hitler, calling people Nazis. No matter who it is, it's a dehumanization that has an end result in feeding, especially young people, especially unstable people, a message of this person does not deserve to live, that it would be better if they were dead. Now let's just see how far Piers Morgan is able to follow this line of logic to his own self-responsibility or his inability to do so.
Just on that point you make about empathy, when I watched those clips, these weren't just young people being stupid, because you could kind of explain that. But I saw, you know, teachers, university professors, doctors, all posting stuff, gleefully celebrating the cold-blooded execution of a young man with a wife and 2 kids who were there. And that was something more than just, you know, a lack of empathy. And I don't think it was linked to them seeing themselves as great revolutionaries. It was just an absolute disconnect from normal human reaction. I mean, I've actually interviewed genuine medically diagnosed psychopaths who are medically, deemed to be incapable of feeling empathy, guilt, and so on. But these people aren't in that category. What has happened to them to make them so completely detached from the reality of what they're doing?
I'm myself mystified by the mystification. So I don't know even how to talk about this, Piers. These people are not in a medical state. They have loaded a revolutionary program. And let's say when America went to war against Germany and Japan, we used phrases like the Jerrys and the Japs, and we wrote messages on munitions that we used to kill the enemy. This is what they're doing. They're writing on bullets and casings. They are doing message killing. And the odd part about it is we don't recognize that they are at war. Now, you make the point that they're not real revolutionaries. And this has to do with the fact that, let's say a nurse who administers anesthesia and IVs, somebody with real control over your life, becomes a revolutionary. He may have a perfectly nice life as a nurse, and he's not eager to die. However, the program that has been loaded is exactly this program. The first thing you do is you paint the target. So notice the following words: fascist, reactionary, Zionist, Nazi. As soon as you see someone painted with those terms, the empathy complex changes. Tell me something. Have you ever had really good lamb?
Yes, many times.
Or veal?
Yeah.
If you think about what lamb and veal are, it's one of the most upsetting concepts. But you're given language, which is I'll have the lamb, no, I'll have the veal, and you don't actually think about what it means. And so what I'm claiming is that when you hear somebody talking about, oh, I'm fighting reactionaries, I'm fighting the Zios, punch a Nazi, that guy's a reactionary, far right. That is the language used to paint the enemy so that you don't need to feel bad about the enemy dying or getting hurt. You can celebrate this. And this issue of message killing is something I've been talking about for a long time. If you have something like the AP Style Guide and it says we can't print manifestos of killers anymore, the public doesn't know that there's an entire theory or a doctrine called strategic silence. So they're sitting there watching their news, trying to figure out, well, what's the motive? And the motive that comes through the AP Style Guide might be something like, the alleged mass killer is reputed to have shouted a foreign religious slogan in another language. And you're thinking, oh, come on, you can't even report on what happened. So that gives the illusion of a cover-up, because what's going on is that the news organizations have been pre-programmed as to how they can report on this. So you have a situation in which we have a group called the woke that don't really exist, or the progressives, which are actually normalized revolutionaries, particularly within the Democratic Party. My party has normalized revolutionaries inside the party. There are normalized revolutionaries in the other party, the Republicans, much more around Christian nationalism and Christian identity. And you're now playing this game where we are undoing a tolerant liberal society where the only people with real ideas are these fringe individuals. So let me just make a point that people aren't going to have thought much about. The normalized revolutionaries inside the Democratic Party have ideas. AOC has ideas. Mamdani has ideas. Hillary Clinton does not have ideas. You have this group of people, particularly people, let's say in their 20s now, who've not been invited into the party of Western civilization. They are not being given the means to have babies, a mortgage, to participate in a profound way, and they're being asked to conserve a society that is more or less using them as a protein source. And as a result, the real problem is that the two parties, the centers of the two parties in the US, don't have ideas. They have no offerings. They've got revolutionaries. They're playing with revolutionaries. The revolutionaries are getting normalized. There's an entire shifted empathy complex. People, let's say 40 to 15, which you saw around the Charlie Kirk thing. We're having a discussion about it as if it's an individual mental health crisis. It isn't. This is one of the things that the human mind can be trained to do if it goes to war, which is it can't oversympathize with the enemy. And these people are very much at war with the society that houses them. It's, if I can make an analogy, at some point the Gulf cartel in Mexico hired the Zetas from Mexican special forces as their muscle. And, you know, I just gave an interview with the A16Z podcast where I said Antifa is in many ways the armed wing of the Democratic Party. And I'm talking about my party.
Yeah, I completely agree. So what's the answer? Because I've got a new book coming out called Woke is Dead. I say in that I don't think it's actually dead yet, but I do feel that the ideology was given a sort of spectacular repudiation when Trump got re-elected, that a lot of people looked at the way the Democrats in particular had gone down this progressive woke left path, leading to the kind of insanity of promoting trans athletes and women's sport and so on. And they realized they kind of lost all ability to sound like they understood basic common sense. And therefore, if we, as a society, we sort of come through years of this, and I think most people now instinctively recoil against a lot of that woke ideology. Therefore, the ideology is dying. Do you agree with that? And if not, what is the solution?
Yeah, I don't agree with this at all. First of all, I don't think there was woke ideology. I think that's the name we gave to revolutionary ideology. A revolutionary ideology doesn't die quite so quickly. I think people are just waking up to what an actual what a rifle is. I think people have the idea, well, 100 yards sounds like very far away. And if you talk to anybody who knows their way around an AR-15, it's a long time before you have to start taking in Coriolis forces and wind conditions. I think people have no idea what Pandora's box they've opened. And Piers, if I could just bring it back to this program, as you know, I very much enjoy doing this program, but principally I insist that it's you and me in one-on-one. And why is that? It's because this program also is normalizing the most insane voices. If you think about it, you're very capable of having a terrific one-on-one discussion, but you're also at the same time playing with people who are completely unhinged in a sort of Jerry Springerization of the discussion of our problems. Some of those people that you have on are revolutionaries. They're not actually normal guests.
Who are you talking
and that
about?
Revolutionary empathy.
Well, who are you talking about?
I'm not going to get into it.
Well, you got to give an example of what you got to give an example, surely.
I have no problem giving an example. I'm trying to tell you about what my issue is that they come to my house. They publish my address. What you're talking about is inviting people who have absolutely no regard for life, for family, for even normal politics. And what I'm trying to say is we don't understand who we've opened the door to. If you look at all of those videos asking for Charlie Kirk reactions, do you imagine you're looking at thousands upon thousands of mental illness cases? No, you're looking at an ideology that you can't kill so easily. And in fact, you know, I ran a poll recently on Twitter. Are there illiberal ideas that cannot be reversed by liberal measures alone? The more you open the door to this insanity of trans athletes and cross-dressers in charge of our spent nuclear material, all this kind of stuff, the more you're going to have an illiberal reaction in the form of Donald Trump, MAGA, and the hardliners in the Republican Party who are going to say that we cannot afford to keep this door open to normalized madness. And so, you know, I would love to have a discussion about it, but quite frankly, these people are scary dangerous. I have not had a podcast for 5 years, in part because of the increased threat coming from recognized revolutionary behavior.
I mean, you said recently, you wrote actually, when it comes to speech, there is shouldn't, brackets bad, mustn't, unthinkable, can't illegal. If broadly celebrating political murder of national figures is merely shouldn't, we will all end up with can't. Free speech is all about mustn't. We bet all of society on mustn't. What exactly did you mean by that?
Now, thank you for bringing that up. Really appreciate the opportunity. You mustn't burn the flag. It's not that you can't. It shouldn't be illegal to burn the flag. And it's not that you really shouldn't because it's a bad thing to do. It should be unthinkable. And I want to live in a country in which I have every right to burn my flag, and it never once occurs to me during a normal life that that would be a thing that I would even consider doing. There's this concept of mustn't, which is cultural, which is what stops very dangerous fit ideas. You see, the fitness of an idea determines how easily it spreads. You can have a bad idea that's fit just the way a virus is fit in an evolutionary sense. And so what we're really looking for is we're looking for very strong cultural prohibitions that leave us a free people with every legal right to express ourselves. What you're starting to see is that the violation of mustn't, there's no concept of mustn't. You mustn't celebrate Charlie Kirk's murder. It's an absolute. It's not a legal requirement that you not celebrate it. It's like, come on, man. What, have you lost your mind? Have you lost your humanity? And that is increasingly seen as funny or quaint.
Right, but how? So look, just coming back to what you said about this show and who we platform and stuff. You know, I have people who react to me platforming you, right? Who say you're a dangerous extremist and so on. You've heard that yourself many times, I'm sure. I don't view you as either dangerous.
So that is a classic Piers Morganism right there. And I think that's a funny word, Piers Morganism, because he is like a kind of like a viral organism, the way he interacts with the world. He feeds off of negative outrage and platforming people who shouldn't be platformed. So I want to point out that what's happening with Eric Weinstein's a very, very smart guy. But his response right there was rather limited and disconnected, if you ask me. I don't think very many people would even understand what he's exactly saying. It's too wordy. It's too complex. Whereas the idea is essentially simple, and it has to do with what I mentioned in the intro. It has to do with discernment between good and evil. And what is the power of language and words? What type of coded words need to be recognized and deplatformed or not projected out into the mainstream world? And his point is for Piers Morgan specifically, who I loved his analogy of Jerry Springer type of interactions. That's exactly what Piers Morgan feeds off of, and his channel would be completely unsuccessful, most likely, if he didn't do this. He recognizes this, whether subconsciously or consciously, and what he's doing right now is trying to what about this and turn the exact example of this discernment between good and evil back on to Eric Weinstein. Now, like I say, Eric Weinstein isn't dumb, but his inability to simplify the message and to say, well, because he says, well, what about you? Some people think that you're evil and that you're sending bad messages and that you shouldn't be platformed. The whole concept of that is to evade personal responsibility. Almost nobody is saying that about Eric Weinstein, although I would suggest that anyone who is just part of this radicalization type of trolling concept that we see all over on the internet. It's literally everywhere. And for some reason, that stuff it feeds a certain type of dopamine reaction in the person doing it. Maybe they're able to feed a type of cultural response that once they get that response, other people comment on their totally inhumane observation. And also there is a certain amount of crazy people out there. The whole point is to not platform that craziness, to not project it out into the world. And so what you'll see over and over again in this conversation as we keep going, we're not done yet, is Piers Morgan unable to look at himself, and for Eric Weinstein to be somewhat unable to turn it back around on Piers. Maybe it's out of respect because this is his show. It's Piers Morgan's show. So maybe he's just doing that out of some type of honor or respect and trying, or maybe just to be able so he can keep coming back on. Whereas I would point out that the obvious connection is Piers Morgan's inability to see his own self-responsibility, and that what Eric Weinstein's trying to say is, yes, you need to have some gatekeeping in regards to not pushing a discernible evil ideology or coded call to action to violence out to the public, one that feeds the negative behavior, which is clearly contributing to the type of assassinations and violence, which is mostly left-wing at this point. Although because the coded language happens from both sides, we're seeing a lot of bizarre support from the military-industrial complex, for instance, to push what might be considered extreme right-wing ideology or right-wing calls to violence. But I would also point out that the military-industrial complex, for instance, is completely both sides. They fund both sides of the aisle. They will absolutely have control over a certain amount of Democrat politicians, just like they do over the Republican politicians. And so when it comes to that, it really isn't just right wing. Really, they're playing a much smarter game, and part of this left wing, right wing rhetoric is just about division. So the point is to undivide, to have integrity in the media organization to try and avoid this type of end result. Let's get back to it.
I haven't heard that I'm a dangerous.
I don't think that about you for a moment, but I'm curious who you think we've platformed who would fit that category that you're discussing,
with that type of
and whether
question.
you
But
think
you just repeated something which I don't.
Well, I'm just talking about random. I'm talking about random people on social media. I'm not talking about a mainstream voice. I'm talking about random people commenting when we do stuff. There's always a few that pop up who think you're a lunatic, right? As there are with everyone I talk to. I can interview Mother Teresa, and there'd be people calling her a dangerous lunatic.
Piers, for God's sake, man, I'm a Harvard PhD with an MIT postdoc. I've been funded by Soros and Thiel. Nobody really thinks that I'm stupid. Nobody thinks that I'm a dangerous lunatic. Nobody really thinks that I'm far left or far right. There's a bunch of morons on the internet, and if you want to decide that they have a voice, then I'm sure that some of them think I'm a robot, some of them think I'm a hologram, and some of them think that I'm a space alien. If you decide that you're going to open the discussion to those voices, I'll go get a sandwich. You're not a dangerous lunatic.
That's not the point I'm making.
I'm not a dangerous lunatic.
I think you're missing my point. I've got no problem with you saying what you said about some of the people we platform. I'm just curious who these people are that you think I shouldn't be platforming. Because without saying who they are, it's very hard for me to assess it.
Why would I want to repeat anyone's name who has this characteristic and profile? In other words, what I'm telling you is we've got a country that is wall-to-wall stocked with high-powered rifles that allow very far shots to be made relatively easily. And you're talking about the fact that woke is over. No. There are going to be revolutionaries at various levels throughout your life. You'll never get rid of them. They are never going away. And what we're talking about is we're talking about not inviting them into our lives. Every time you ask for, what are the names? What are the specifics? Get into it. I will tell you, why invite that person to a bigger audience? Why invite that person to paint more targets with words like reactionary, Nazi, Zionist, all of these things, alt-right, far-right?
It's funny because he throws Zionist in with fascist, Nazi, and also reactionary. I don't really see the connection there, but clearly I think one can delineate that there's a little bit of a pro-Zionist thing going on with Eric Weinstein. That's okay. I mean, in my last video, I tried to point out some good things about the Jews. I think that's the response that needs to be had when it comes to talking about platforming. It's really about integrity. It's about trying to create good conversations, because we have a impossible goal ahead of us, which is, because of technology being an impassable burden, because of exponential technology, we have a direct responsibility to try and remove rivalrous thinking from our mindset. We need to actually intentionally try and remove that from our speech and from our platforms, from the integrity of media organizations and networks, from radio and TV, from any type of publicly available rhetoric, because the rivalrous nature of human nature is in conflict with exponential technology. I'm about to do a whole video on that, but let's keep going on this.
That stuff is going to get more and more people killed. So I would prefer that we talk about this in general, which is anybody with wildly and radically shifted empathy. You'll see somebody smiling when they're trying to destroy another person's character. You know, you'll see a different shift in the basic notion of what makes someone happy. You'll see people who are far more concerned with people they've never met than their own family members or even their own life. If you want to think about this in a positive way, for example, you could remember the Abraham Lincoln Brigade that went to the Civil War involving Franco in Spain. Those were Americans who, for whatever reason, decided that they were so ideologically committed that they were willing to give their own lives in a foreign war that no one was drafting them to fight. I'm telling you that you have to understand that there's an archetype, which is the revolution.
I understand that. I understand it, but people would say, okay, but Eric, people would say about you, you know, some people say this about you, that you operate outside of mainstream thinking about a lot of things.
Here comes his whataboutism.
Right? Maybe you, and I'm sure you'd be quite happy to concede that and say, yeah, you do. But people will say that, and they'll say, well, I shouldn't be platforming you for that reason. So my question really, I'm not, you know, obviously it's difficult to know who you're talking about if you don't say who it is. But my point is, who is the arbiter of who should not be platformed?
So notice what just happened there with Piers Morgan bringing that up. Instead of making the connection to his own personal self-responsibility, it'd be pretty easy if you think about it. If he had an open mind, if he was not trying to platform outrage and make money off of it, if he was trying to evade responsibility in that way, the natural reaction would be to respond with this whataboutism, to try and turn it around, to never say, hey, yeah, actually, I am noticing that as I'm going through my my media cycles and the different types of comments that I'm getting. I'm actually drawing a connection to platforming these specific people and who say these specific things, who represent extreme versions of one side or the other that essentially fuel a divide nature of human nature. They fuel that, and I'm trying to recognize where I can take responsibility for that myself. You won't see Piers Morgan doing that at all, because if he does, that would directly affect his bottom line. And his show is a Jerry Springer type of show, and so it will always have that element. It's one of the most frustrating things for me watching his program. And I've noticed it specifically over the past few years about, I mean, he's only recently come around on the concept of Israeli, propaganda. And he's been super pro-Israel with all his stuff until just recently, very recently, has he even made a small curvature turn. And the only reason I believe he's doing that is because of the demographic switch over, because Gen Z actually sees through the propaganda. Gen Z, at least in the United States here, seems to be completely aware of Israeli manipulation and control in politics, in world wars, in the wars around the world. Like, they seem to be guiding, and it's more than seem to be. There's a direct hidden hand going where they're controlling the U.S. involvement in wars, like, and support of them. How many billions of dollars have we sent to them to help fund the genocide in Gaza? And even the International Association of Genocide Scholars has stated that Israel is committing genocide. And up until only very recently has Piers Morgan decided to make some type of pushback on that, but he continues to platform Zionists. He continues to platform the worst side of Israeli violent rhetoric, of their coded language, and he does that for a reason. So as he continues to go through this, we'll just observe how he is absolutely unable to recognize his own self-responsibility.
Who is the person who decides whether this person or that person is, not worthy of being platformed, or should
You are that person.
be under the category of mustn't, as you put it in that paragraph that I read out? Who is
Right here, this is where Eric Weinstein should say, you are that person who needs to decide what that discernment between good and evil is, between the violent rhetoric that is a coded call to action that shouldn't be platformed, and to instead promote connective rhetoric, to promote understanding and communication that recognizes the oneness of all humanity, because that's what's needed. And technically, we are all one race, right? They've proven that. Technically, we're more alike than different. So it's literally a choice. That's what bring back up that word discernment. The concept of discernment here is everything. And Eric Weinstein is totally blowing it here by not turning this back on Piers Morgan and saying, actually, you are the person who's responsible here, at least in the context of your own show.
Who's the arbiter of this stuff? Is it you, who some people consider out there yourself? Is it somebody else? Is there some kind of papal figure we have
are we that
for determining our booking process?
Piers, are we that confused? I mean, look, if somebody starts talking about the need to murder little children, let's say, are we going to pretend that person is potentially as outrageous as somebody who talks about the fact that maybe our taxes need to be a little bit lower?
No, but let me give you an example. I have people on who are extremely Zionist, okay, in their thinking. And they come on and they can often talk in a way that many people find grotesquely offensive about what the Israeli government has been doing in Gaza and so on. Now, many people on the pro-Palestinian side would say, it's appalling that I platform these inhuman, callous people who speak in such a language. If I had someone like Smodrich or Ben Gvir on from the Israeli government and they started talking casually about ethnically cleansing Palestinians and so on, so the question becomes again for me, I've got no problem with you critiquing the show, but the complexity comes for me if you don't say who you're talking about, because actually I have a lot of guests on that people say I shouldn't platform. And often it's because their own personal positioning says that person's dangerous, that person's an extremist. What they really mean is they challenge what I'm thinking, the individuals who are complaining. And I don't think, the whole point of my show is I tend to bring people on who do disagree with each other and do challenge each other. And I do one-on-ones, but I also, as you know, do occasional panels. And I see no problem with that. But you seem to be kind of having an all-encompassing critique of the show without being specific, which is difficult for me, because I would love to debate an individual booking we've had that you're particularly incensed about. because then I can make a
what
sort
I'm
of
trying
more
to say to
clear-eyed
you-
view. But I'm curious.
Piers, I'm not trying. Yeah.
You see what I mean?
I'm not trying to get anyone. Yeah, but I'm trying not. I am not ever. I promise you this on air. Ever going to try to send dangerous people to the home of one of your guests to terrorize them after the show.
Right.
Right? In other words, what you're talking about largely stays on the show. So the first cut, just the easiest cut to make here, is that a lot of these people are playing off of the internet. It's not just a question of trading tweets or trading ideas or trading accusations. It's a question of how can I endanger this person in their personal life? It's a full game that is nonstop. You know, I have a stalking mob that's been coming after me for years. And it's like, who are they? Well, what do they want? Shut up. Why do I want to talk about these people in specific? The next point that I'm going to try to make is, if you have somebody who's supposedly a Zionist representative who's excited about the death and destruction in Gaza, please don't have that person on unless they have some governmental reason for being on the show. And if you have some revolutionary who's worried about what's going on in Gaza and is excited about missiles falling in Israel and killing civilians, why is that person on? In other words, there is still a thing called basic Western values that you represent, that I represent. You and I think, have recently disagreed in part about what's going on in Israel and Gaza. But my point is, you don't want to see one extra person die who doesn't need to on any side. Neither do I, right? And so we may have different ideas about how to accomplish
No, but I think what would concern me is... but what concerns me, Eric, about this is it's a slippery slope, isn't it, into real, genuine suppression of free speech. You know, what you're really saying is that I should operate a much more stringent and draconian...
This is Barry Weiss pretending not to know anything about the Mossad when she's literally an Israeli Zionist sycophant who's paid for by Israel. She's just been promoted to the head of CBS. And what was the... James Lee, who's been putting out some pretty good stuff, says, Barry Weiss, the new head of CBS News, apparently doesn't know what the Mossad is. Also, a true masterclass by the one and only Tim Dillon, brilliantly exposing just how much of a fraud she really is. I wouldn't say he's exposing it, but he's bringing on some pretty hilarious satire. So let's check this out.
Yossi Cohen, welcome to Honestly.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, a lot of people on the internet believe that you are my boss because they believe that I am a member of the Mossad.
Oh,
but
really?
this is actually the first time that I'm meeting you, or at least as far as I know, any member of the Mossad. So I'm very excited to meet you.
I'm the first one that you've ever met, but
there might be, I might have met people.
Might be others that you know the world.
First, I want to set the table for people because the Mossad is an agency that is just shrouded in so much conspiracy and propaganda. Simple question, Yossi. What is the Mossad?
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Tim Dillon Show. A friend of the show, Barry Weiss, did a fascinating interview with a member of the Mossad, and she really looked into the process, and it was incredibly interesting. So what I want to do now is I wanted to bring someone in to explore an area where I am completely clueless. I mean, completely in the dark. And I wanted somebody to kind of walk me through an area of study that I know nothing about, just like Barry did. So I want to thank you for coming, Chloe. You work at Dairy Queen.
That is true, yes.
What is Dairy Queen in your mind? What is it? Because people say that they serve ice cream there, and I'm not even super sure what that is.
What's ice cream?
Yeah, what is ice cream? Like, what is it?
Oh, it's like the frozen dessert ice cream.
Like a little treat.
It is a treat, yeah.
For like a frozen kind of it's like an ice.
It's sweet. It can be soft or hard. It's chocolate, vanilla.
And those are
the flavors.
Flavors.
Yeah.
So there's different flavors of ice cream.
There's many flavors of ice cream.
So that's something interesting to know too.
Sure, yeah.
I mean, this just keeps going, but pretty funny. This is just to give an example of what is happening with censorship on the internet.
Fiance Travis Kelce said
Look at this real quick.
big news, Taylor Swift just dropped The Life of a Showgirl, and what an album it is. Her fiance Travis Kelce says it's banger after banger. USA Today says she's shaken off the gloom of the tortured poets department and returned with playful pop and sharp
Make sure to
one-liners.
read what's
New York
happening
Times
behind him.
frames it as Taylor hungry to move on, less about feuds and more about her future, though not without some side-eye at her past. The Guardian wasn't as impressed, though, saying that the whole thing feels a little bit rushed, akin to how romantic bliss doesn't fuel the same fire as heartbreak. Billboard magazine describes it as bangers for adults, not another 1989, but mature, sharp, and still packed with hooks. Variety says the love songs here feel easy for once, not battle-tested, which makes the album an uncomplicated good time. And people, they went all in, calling it her most radio-ready album since 1989 and the spiritual sister of Reputation. For me, overall, feels like a reset. Is it her best album? No. But is it entertaining, a little messy, and guaranteed to get people talking? Absolutely.
So, I wanted to show that just because to point out that there is extreme power system from Israel in the United States, and they control almost everything in the censorship industrial complex. And what was going on there was James Lee has been putting out videos since last year that I know of, and earlier this year is the first time I saw of him, and he was putting out some videos on TikTok specifically about the first ones I saw were about the LA riots, and he seemed to be just pointing out some obvious truths, and he gained popularity just by doing that. I thought they were really good. For instance, just looking, he definitely is doing some good investigation. And he also recently, if you go down and scroll through his stuff, I recommend everybody go check him out. He was talking about how he's been being censored on TikTok in a very extreme way, just putting out very simple messages about Israel. And Israel, Larry Ellison just bought TikTok through Donald Trump's executive order, or however that worked. And just before that, there was a new director of censorship algorithms, or whatever it is, of platform content, content integrity, whatever they call it nowadays, something like that. And essentially they're like a censorship czar. And this guy took over. He's like got Israeli ties, Mossad ties. It's hard to tell, where these people come from. But the point of that video was just to show that you can't even put out anything directly criticizing Israel without having coded language in it nowadays. And so, at least on TikTok, right? And you'll find this on Instagram as well. And just depends on, Facebook seems a little bit more lenient, and YouTube's a little bit more lenient. Although you're very easily demonetized if you just look at Alex Jones, if you look at Nick Fuentes. These guys have been demonetized on almost every platform, specifically Nick Fuentes for talking about Israel. And so I just wanted to point that out because I thought it's very interesting that Eric Weinstein is, almost enraged by the concept of talking about Israel. He's at the same time as what he was actually saying was mostly true. And if you just take a step back and really take what he said to heart, he's basically nailing it, which is to say that to stop platforming any of the content that is discernibly evil, and to take these evil people with their coded calls to action and try and deplatform them. Unfortunately, this is happening at the highest levels of bureaucracy and politics. So all these politicians like Gavin Newsom, AOC, Tim Walz, Chuck Schumer, these guys are all putting out coded calls to violence, and it seems to be less on the other side. I definitely think it would behoove everybody to look into Thomas Massey. The guy has really been doing some good work for America. He's definitely America first. I think him and Marjorie Taylor Greene are the only congressional representatives that don't have AIPAC sponsors. And that's just important to note. And he's been actually doing some really good work. He really worked hard to get the Epstein files released. He put out that, whatever it was, memorandum, or it was something that was voted on by both the left and the right, and it was shut down because both the left and the right do not want the Epstein files released. So whenever they seem to have be arguing for it, or as if it's all Trump or Elon Musk or whoever it is, this is all part of the game being played. And there's only very few people in Congress who seem to actually be working for the American people, and Thomas Massey is one of them. I see some pretty good things from Rand Paul as well, but I just recommend everybody go check him out. He really is a pretty good guy, I think, and makes me want to move to Kentucky. That's where he's from. And so anyway, I'll leave you with that. Remember to love your friends, love your neighbor. I love you all. God bless, and I'll see you next time. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. It really helps me out. And I will catch you on the flip side.